Why don't you have any motivation or willpower or discipline? You can't get yourself to do the things you want to do or need to do, and it feels like you've tried everything, every hack out there, but nothing works because those hacks also require willpower to do the hack. It's like you're trying to climb up a hill and you're being told that the strategy to get to the top of the hill is to carry more weight. It's just not good advice. So everyone is telling you to use hacks to get discipline, but no one is telling you that there's only one real way to get discipline, to be a disciplined person. And the good news is that your body has a built-in motivation function. I'm going to show you how to use it so that you can do what you want to do when you want to do it. And once you learn about it and how to use it, you will experience a waterfall of willpower. You'll be like all those go-getters on those podcasts that you see that talk about their morning routines and how they ran a triple Ironman backwards, blindfolded, and on one foot. That's a joke, but you know what I'm talking about. And once you understand this one biological function in your brain that controls motivation, you can build whatever morning routine you want and do it every single morning without any struggle. You can build whatever life you want and do it every single day without stress. This video summarizes the in-depth studies of neuroscience and behavioral psychology as it relates to motivation, and simplifies it to just one thing you need to know to have that motivation and discipline that you've always wanted. Imagine being able to wake up and just do everything you plan to do that day, and then have the energy and the motivation to do even more than you plan to do. You've heard of these people, all those inspirational athletes and entrepreneurs and scientists who somehow find a way to get so much done. The good news is that we are built the same, except for maybe the athletes, but in regards to this motivation mechanism in our brain, we have the same ability to perform as these inspirational people. I know this works, not only because of these studies and the science, but because I've applied this to my own life. I used to be someone who would have grand plans of what I was going to do the next day, whether it's like a house project or work assignment or starting a new hobby or waking up and going for a run or whatever it was, but never actually did any of those things because I did not have the discipline or the motivation to do it. And what happened is that every time I planned to do something and then didn't do it, I trained myself to think that I was someone that couldn't get things done, that I was a piece of fecal matter that just didn't have the drive that other people had. And so to hide the discomfort, this deep feeling where I thought I was doomed to not have a fulfilling life, I would choose escapism and do things like play video games. Lots and lots of video games, hours on end trying to be the master of the video game because I could not be a master of my own life. And I wasn't doing this consciously, and you probably aren't either. And there's a reason why we do this, which will be explained later. But it still hurts. It hurts seeing all these other people succeed, but the best thing I could do and say about myself was that I was highly ranked in a video game. I didn't want that life anymore, and I was super lucky to stumble upon a neuroscience video explaining how motivation worked in the brain, and everything clicked. I realized that I shouldn't be wasting my time using unnatural methods to hack discipline and motivation, and instead, I should just lean into doing it the way my brain is designed to do it. Our brains already have the built-in systems for motivation, and all I had to do was study them and then use them to become a highly motivated individual. My life is very different now. I have a home, job, wife, 2 kids, and a dog, and I find time for all of them. Plus, cooking and eating healthy, exercise, family, friends, throwing parties, hosting events, running a YouTube channel, lots of things. It just, the time appears. And I wish I measured the motivation level over time, because of course it didn't happen overnight, but it still happened quickly. And you'll realize that within weeks, you will be a different person, and within months, you will have a different life. It's important you understand how important this is, and that's why it took so long to get to the actual content, because if I didn't and you clicked away without knowing this information, it would be like I robbed you of your life's potential because I didn't take the time to persuade you to watch. But now that you're this far, it's going to be nothing but valuable knowledge and practical solutions, and I hope that you watch to the end because you owe it to yourself. There are only 3 parts to this video, and you've already finished the first part of understanding why you need this. Part 2 is where does motivation come from? You cannot skip this, it's very important for you to understand. And part 3 is how do I activate motivation to become a highly disciplined individual? And now, for the super valuable information, it's a bit nerdy, but I think it's interesting and I think you will as well. Part 2, where does motivation come from? Anything you do, anytime you want to do something, however big or small, picking up a pencil or writing a thesis paper, your brain sends out a bunch of dopamine, which essentially drives you to go do that thing. It's like if you want a car to move forward, you press the gas pedal, which is the equivalent of your brain producing a bunch of dopamine. And then when the gas pedal is pressed, the car will move. And if your brain produced enough dopamine, your body will move. You will take action. Gas makes car go. Dopamine makes body go. And I know that's confusing because pop culture and memes have kind of confused everyone about what dopamine is, and we tend to associate dopamine with things like pleasure, like getting that dopamine hit from a video game. And that's not completely wrong, but we need to reframe it a little bit, because in reality, dopamine is a molecule of motivation. It's used to propel us to take actions that would promote things like, reproduction and survival, eating food, winning competitions, having sex. So dopamine is not about pleasure. It's about the anticipation of pleasure. It's not about reward, it's about the anticipation of reward. And to demonstrate, they did this study on monkeys where they showed these monkeys a light. And then the monkeys had to press a button 10 times. And on the 10th time, a delicious treat would appear. And so they measured the dopamine activity in the brains of these monkeys during this experiment, and this is what it looked like. As the monkey sees the light, a huge amount of dopamine is released into the brain, and the monkey feels compelled to start pressing the button. And you can see that the biggest dopamine spike is just from the signals, from the light, from the cue, from the anticipation of the reward. The dopamine then starts to drop back down towards baseline as the monkey gets to work pressing the button. You'll notice that the work and the reward didn't result in the same amount of dopamine release as the signal. Dopamine was at its highest when the brain needed to propel the monkey towards doing the work. Sounds a lot like motivation, right? In fact, every time you hear me say dopamine, you can pretty much swap out the word for motivation and it still makes sense. For example, dopamine gets us to do things. It's basically like your motivational resource, your motivational mana. For my fellow nerds out there, mana anyway. And you only get a certain amount of dopamine each day. Or said another way, you only get a certain amount of motivation each day. But you can build your daily amount of dopamine. And spoiler alert, you can also lower your daily amount of dopamine. And this is called your dopamine baseline, your motivational baseline. Those highly motivated individuals we talked about before have a very high dopamine baseline. My previous self probably had a pretty low dopamine baseline. And so your dopamine rises and falls according to baseline. You feel motivated to act when your dopamine levels are above the baseline, like in this first part. And you lack the motivation to act when your dopamine levels drop below the baseline, like the second part. Now, a normal activity like brushing your teeth would not require a big dopamine spike to get you to go do that, because that's something we've built into a habit. And habits and routines don't require a lot of dopamine to take action on because they've kind of used different parts of the brain to help do that behavior. Brushing your teeth is also a very predictable behavior. Nothing crazy is going to happen like a spider jumping out or winning $1 million, right? And because this behavior of brushing your teeth is a normal habit with minimal variance, your body can perform it with minimal dopamine spend. Now, an unusual activity like scrolling TikTok is where dopamine gets misused. Your brain has something called a dopamine spike, which is just a huge influx of dopamine when it anticipates doing something it perceives as very pleasurable, like TikTok. Now, let's see what that looks like in the morning. If you wake up and you brush your teeth, which is a good healthy activity, but it isn't exactly like a pleasurable activity, your brain gives you just enough dopamine to go do it. But if you wake up and your phone is beside you within arm's reach and you have a low dopamine baseline and you think about how getting out of bed is so hard and you just don't want to, this uncomfortable thought, this discomfort leads you to immediately seek comfort. Discomfort makes you want to seek pleasure, right? And your phone is right beside you. It's arm's reach, and TikTok is just a few taps away and the easiest source of pleasure right now. If there was chocolate or a bag of chips on the bedside table, that would be the same thing, just quick, easy comfort or pleasure. So you're uncomfortable thinking about getting up and starting your day. So guess what your low dopamine baseline chooses to do? It spikes to get you to go find a comfort activity like opening TikTok. And so you just woke up. It's early morning and you've already spiked your limited daily resource of dopamine just to aimlessly scroll TikTok as a way of delaying getting out of bed. This is not shaming you or anyone. This is just explaining how our brain is guiding our behavior. And it gets worse. TikTok, as you know, is watching a video and then swiping up to the next video. TikTok videos, especially entertaining ones, are designed to also spike your dopamine. They set up a hook at the start of the video, and that gets you to watch it to the end, and the hook basically tells your brain that there is something to look forward to. And so your brain spikes dopamine so that you take the action of waiting for whatever the video punchline is. And it gets worse. You've only watched one video so far, and maybe you didn't even make it through all the way to the end of the video because that video wasn't doing a good job of giving you pleasure, or rather hiding your discomfort, right? And so you swipe up to the next video. And this action of swiping up also causes a dopamine spike because in a micro sense, you sought out comfort, you sought out pleasure because that current video wasn't doing it for you. So you use dopamine to swipe to go get that comfort, right? And however, because of how easy it is to swipe each time you do it, it still uses a bunch of dopamine to do the simple action of swiping up. Think of it this way. Each time you swipe up on TikTok is the equivalent amount of dopamine or motivation that's needed to go do something in real life. Like, getting out of bed, brushing your teeth, getting changed, making breakfast, feeding the dog, whatever it is. That's the equivalent dopamine usage of watching 5 TikToks. That's not exactly like an accurate measure because we'd actually need to measure it to know, but in terms of brain mechanics and the purpose of this video, you should really think of it in that way, which is kind of scary, right? There's a reason that these companies spend billions of dollars of trying to get us, glued to these platforms. It's not by accident. They know how dopamine works in the brain and they know exactly what they're doing when they send us notifications or rewards or whatever. It's designed to abuse the dopamine function in your brain. And there is a very interesting correlation between productivity over the years and the introduction of social media and where it is today. The most dangerous activities are the ones that can quickly and easily spam spikes in your dopamine. We're talking about, TikTok, obviously, video games, gambling, binge eating a party-sized bag of Doritos. Each time you reach for a chip or swipe up, you spike your dopamine, and right after there is a crash because your brain is trying to keep your dopamine around baseline. It's trying to keep homeostasis. So here's a spike from the anticipation of TikTok, and here's the reality that it didn't really give you the true comfort you were hoping for, and so you still feel crappy, and even crappier when your dopamine drops below baseline. So you swipe up again in hopes of not feeling crappy and spike your dopamine again, but even less this time because your brain just can't keep up with the energy it's burning to keep producing and spiking your dopamine like that so frequently, and then you come crashing down again and feeling bad. It's just a bad roller coaster, and it's hard to get off the ride because you crave that dopamine that you got from the first time you started scrolling or from that first chip that you ate. That was the peak of your pleasure. And this behavior is exactly the behavior of addicts and addiction. People joke about video game addiction and phone addiction, but they are real things. On a literal brain level, your brain is experiencing the exact same things it would as any other addiction. And of course, there are some differences, but functionally, it is going through the same processes. As a fellow video gamer myself, I'd like to share about how video games, unfortunately, have one of the highest dopamine spikes out of all activities that aren't drug related. And it hurts to know. Trust me, it hurts to know, but as a fellow gamer, but don't worry, there is good news coming up on that subject in part 3. But now, before we get to that, I have to tell you the worst parts. The worst parts is that whenever you fall into these cycles, these addictive behaviors of scrolling TikTok or grabbing a bag of chips whenever you feel slight discomfort or whatever it is, or playing video games whenever you want to avoid responsibility or thinking about how you have to go to dishes, when you do these things, you lower your dopamine baseline. You lower your brain's daily motivational resource. There was a study done on mice where they literally extracted dopamine from the brains and found that the mice had no will to do anything. They would just lay there, very much alive, but their body would not move. They had zero motivation to do anything. You could put their favorite food an inch from their face and they would not move an inch to get it. And eventually they would starve to death. No dopamine, no motivation, no action, literally no life. You absolutely need dopamine to live life. And if you have low dopamine, that's called depression. Low dopamine levels is essentially the cause of depression. And if you do things that are lowering your dopamine baseline, you are setting yourself up to be clinically depressed. You've heard of these people that literally can't get out of bed, whose room is a mess, there's garbage piling up in the corners, bills stacking up on the desk, who lost their job because they just can't. They can't because they don't have enough dopamine to take action. Again, this is not judgment. This is describing what happens when you mistreat your dopamine. You need to protect your dopamine like it's the only thing that matters, because in many ways it is. And the answer is not as simple as just quitting junk dopamine behaviors. Quitting addictive things is really, really hard, and just cold quitting usually never works. So quitting your junk dopamine behaviors is going to require a very specific blueprint, in which I'm going to talk about in part 3 of this video. So remember, your situation, no matter what it is not hopeless. Unless Unless, if you think you have clinical depression, that you literally cannot take action, that's something you really need to see a mental health professional about. That's super important. Please pay attention to that. However, if you aren't that far gone yet, if you aren't to those levels, then we're going to walk you through how you can bring your dopamine back up to functional levels or even higher and get your life back together. And I promise you, there's nothing more important than understanding and acting on this video. Because once you have a strong dopamine baseline, it opens up your life to doing anything you want to do. Just remember that you are absolutely in control and you are about to have the exact blueprints to reach full control of your brain, body, and life. All right, we did it. Time for part 3. How do I use my dopamine to become a highly motivated individual? So we know that dopamine is what gets you to go do things. And we know that some things require a little bit of dopamine because the reward is not that sexy, like brushing your teeth. And it requires even less dopamine because it's a habit you built and you've kind of used other parts of your brain to help you go do it. And we also know that dopamine, aka motivation, is a limited daily resource that resets after a good night's sleep. We also know that quick rewards like video games and TikTok or cheap pleasure like binging a bag of chips burns through your daily dopamine. And because the time interval from dopamine release to the reward in things like TikTok, it's really short, and that's bad because you're spamming it. So like compared to brushing your teeth where you just need one dopamine surge to go do all the action required for brushing your teeth, it takes like 5 minutes, whereas a TikTok swipe takes a second. If you compare the time it takes to watch the TikToks that you would have spent brushing your teeth, that's a lot of dopamine that you're burning through. It's not quite apples to apples, but you get what I'm saying. We also learned that too many cheap pleasures and quick rewards lowers your dopamine baseline over time, leading to generally having lower motivation in life and even potentially depression. All right, so we learned a lot of interesting things. Now let's put this knowledge to work and learn how to turn that low dopamine baseline into a highly disciplined superhuman. Step 1, you are going to build a basic set of habits and routines to keep your life stabilized. These are, the things like brushing your teeth, going to work, doing the dishes, the bare minimum to have a stable foundation to build on. And the way you're going to do this is you're going to trick your dopamine system in your brain. Your brain has a dopaminergic system that is part of the mesocortical limbic pathway, which includes the prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is the rational thinking and planning part of your brain. And you are going to use it as follows. When you go to do the dishes, specifically while you're doing the dishes, you are going to hype yourself up. You're going to praise the heck out of yourself. You're going to tell yourself that you are the coolest person in the world and for putting in the effort of doing the dishes. Like it's the best thing you've done all decade. And then your prefrontal cortex will get your brain to release dopamine while doing the dishes. Not before, not after, while doing the dishes. While it's putting in the effort, it will release dopamine. You are essentially going to trick yourself into getting dopamine during doing the work itself. And this works. It's been measured. You can essentially lie to yourself to get a dopamine spike. And then, this is the best part, and then what happens is that the next time you need to go do the dishes, your brain will remember that it got a dopamine spike the last time it did dishes. And now it's going to be a lot more willing to go do dishes again because it is expecting a dopamine spike the next time too. It's the same as gambling. Like if you think you might win, aka get a big dopamine hit, you're gonna go be willing to gamble again. But instead of gambling, you're just gonna go clean the kitchen, which is great. So step 1 is to slowly implement this into all the areas of your life to make that step 1, daily life as consistent and stable as possible. To do this, as long as it takes for it to become so natural that you can just start doing the dishes without realizing it. This will only take a few weeks to a few months to do, and it obviously depends on where your starting dopamine baseline level is. Step 2 is another trick we're gonna play on our brain. So with gambling, there's this thing where because we are uncertain about the reward is not guaranteed. Like say there's a 50% chance of winning, but because there's not a guaranteed reward, for whatever reason, your brain loves that uncertainty. So it will spike, with more intensity to go get you to do something that has a unpredictable reward. And we're gonna do the same thing with dishes. So when you hype yourself up while you're doing the dishes, you are also going to treat yourself to like chocolate or music or whatever thing excites you. But then sometimes you're going to hype yourself up without the chocolate and music. And then sometimes you're going to not hype yourself up at all or get chocolate or music. And this is just like a slot machine where sometimes you win big, sometimes you win a little, and sometimes you don't win at all. And your brain loves this format. This is why gambling apps and casinos are evil for abusing this, because it's just such a powerful thing that your brain does. That's why loot boxes for my video game friends out there is so addictive for so many people. Anyways, you get the point. Randomize the frequency of reward for the thing you're trying to, the effort activity you're trying to build up. Step 3. I'm not going to torture you by banning TikTok and video games, but I am mandating that you cannot layer dopamine activities. That means that you can't drink coffee and scroll TikTok. That means you can't eat food and watch Netflix. Combining two high dopamine activities spikes dopamine even higher and harder and speeds up the process of then crashing and then ultimately lowering your dopamine baseline. So new house rule, no combining high dopamine activities. No layering them. Good? Sweet? All right. Step 4, movement. Lots of movement. If car makes your gas go and dopamine makes you take action, then movement is putting the key in the ignition to turn on the car. Movement is putting the body in motion to turn on the motivation. If you're having trouble getting yourself to do dishes, like in step 1, then you just need to try some movement first, whether it's walking, jumping jacks, stretching, dancing, anything to get the body going. The blood flow helps the muscles and the brain make it easier for things to get going. It feels counterintuitive that if you're too tired to do the dishes that you need to go take a walk first, but that's just the way it is. And there's also the law of momentum amongst other things. So you are going to incorporate a lot of movement into your daily stable routine. Walks, stretches, dancing, whatever. New house rule, if no doing the fun stuff until you've done enough movement stuff. You want to build movement into your daily routine to be an easy way to start motivation, all right? And finally, step 5. After some time, you're going to feel a significant shift in your willpower and your ability to do things on command. In addition to the habits and routines you're building in your daily life, you're also going to be way more willing to try things you've never tried before. For example, the before me would never consider learning how to change the tires on my car or charge a car battery or build a raised bed or whatever it is. And activities that before seemed like way too daunting and required too much effort and studying and all this stuff. You will no longer feel that way. You will be way more willing to take on projects that you have never considered doing before. And these wins stack. Each time you complete a project like the changing the tires on the car or whatever it is, your confidence gets boosted and your willingness to try something new or difficult is increased. And you will feel also a lot less tired because the habits you're building require your brain to spend less energy because it puts those things on autopilot. Whereas without habits, you would have a chaotic lifestyle and you would need to constantly problem solve your way through your day, and that really burns through your daily brain resources. I hope I'm painting a good picture of the before and after, because it really is like night and day. And if you're willing to try this, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Specifically, if you please tell me where you think your motivation level is from like 0 to 10, where 10 is like those highly motivated individuals we talked about and 0 being those mice in the experiment. Then come back to this video in a few weeks or months and then give me that number again. Think of it as like contributing to science, because when others read your before and after number, they will be inspired to go try this out too. And I hope you learned a lot in this, and feel free to watch more brain settings to learn how to use your brain to do a bunch of other stuff.